If a dog walks past now and I decide to stomp that dog to death, you would not stop me.
It's not my dog, to be honest. I grew up in a country where stray dogs are everywhere, so, people hunt those dogs like it's nothing, It's like they're like rats on the streets. Like, would you stomp a rat? I would stomp a rat, yeah.
Hi, Seth. My name's Ed. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you as well. As you're well aware, today we're at USC, and I have a banner with just a very simple question. Why aren't you vegan yet? You've been waiting and you've kindly sat down. What is your response to that question?
So there's a lot of reasons. I would just like to say right off the bat, like I was vegan for a year.
Yeah, nice.
And I just didn't enjoy the experience too much. And, just from my own personal morality and my feeling towards animals and towards life, that wasn't really the reason why I went vegan. I didn't go for the morality reason. I went for more of the health kind of reason, and to just see what it was about and, see what the kind of craze was about regarding that.
Yeah. Okay, so you used the word your morality there, and we'll come into kind of like what you were saying about the enjoyment and kind of like you don't think it's that bad. And you said it wasn't really kind of like impeding on your morality. When it comes to animals, what is your view about the moral concern and consideration that should be granted to animals?
Well, I heard that before you were talking about exploitation. So I just think like exploitation is a net loss, and like since I don't believe in God personally, and like biologically I believe that it is in our inherent belief, it's our goal to improve the longevity of our species. So in terms of animals, like as long as we can sustainably harvest them without creating that net loss, I think that's like the fine point of eating them, but every day we engage in exploitation, so it's very hard because I think a lot of people don't understand that sustainability is a very complicated construct that we as humans, we are like born to exploit. It's just our nature. It's our nature with every living being.
I mean, of course, historically speaking, we've relied on the exploitation of others to survive, as do all wild animals in some degree or another. But of course, we're different now, aren't we? We have the moral agency. We're able to rationalize decisions. And whilst we may agree that we will never rid all exploitation in the world, surely the aspiration should be to reduce exploitation where we possibly can.
Yeah, but that's your preference, to reduce exploitation in the form of consumption of meat. But for a lot of people, meat is a luxury. My brother and I, we grew up in a third world country, and meat is like you have the rice, which is the bulk of the meal, and then you have that meat, which is the luxury, which is kind of something that a lot of people don't get to enjoy. So as people become more and more privileged, it's like they call it an inferior good, whereas your income increases, you opt to consume less of that product. But yeah, I think that.
What about you and I then in this privileged situation that we're in? Obviously, you spoke about the foods you used to consume, but what about in LA where you have the privilege to make decisions that maybe you weren't able to make before in the past?
Well, yeah, I make decisions every single day, and I try to be sustainable in other areas. But at the end of the day, we're exploiting every single second of our life. Like you're holding a microphone, but if you consider where those materials have come from, like if you've ever been to a steel mine or if you've ever been to a brick factory, those are all exploitations happening every single day, and there is a net negative going on. So it's this kind of pick and choosing thing. If it makes you feel better at the end of the day, sure, go ahead with it. But you're exploiting, I'm exploiting. Everyone here is exploiting. Every human on Earth is exploiting. Even animals are exploiting. That's.
Of course. But it's an appeal to futility, isn't it? The idea that, well, everything is exploitation. We live in an inherently imperfect world. The sourcing of materials is inherently imperfect. So therefore, where we have options and choices, we shouldn't do that because we are futile in our attempts to be perfect. Of course, right, everything is exploitation. Now, let's say that I have two microphones I can choose from. And now one microphone comes from no exploitation and is a fantastically moral product, and the other isn't. And I opt to go for the one that isn't, even though I have that choice side by side. We probably question that choice. Now, with the food that we consume, that's the choice that we have. We go into a supermarket, we go into a restaurant, and it's not that we don't have one or the other, it's that we have both side by side. And we opt to choose one that causes more exploitation over one that doesn't. And that becomes a moral concern, surely.
But see, both cause exploitation at the end of the day. There is no such thing as something that cannot cause exploitation.
Reduced exploitation, reducing that.
You could say reduce exploitation, but the utility that you get out of it, or the benefit that you get out of it, may be more. So if you choose to maybe go with a better quality microphone that maybe uses less of a more harmful or conflict mineral than the other one, but it produces better sound, you can go with that one, because at the end of the day, if you understand that we are exploiting, that you shouldn't worry about those things as much. Like obviously if something is extremely exploitative, that it will harm your well-being in your current life, in your current lifetime, then I could see that being a problem. But
such as the sustainability impact of meat consumption, perhaps.
well, see, I think meat consumption can be sustainable. Well, not, I don't want to say sustainable because nothing really is, in my opinion, is sustainable. Is just like minimizing that gap, minimizing that net loss.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's look at Borneo, okay? They're chopping down tons of rainforest to plant palm, for palm oil.
Yeah.
So that's a huge exploitative industry.
Yeah.
They're, killing the whole biodiversity in that land, and they're reducing the entire environment for the orangutan to live.
See, is this appeal to futility again? We're never going to live in a world without exploitation. That obviously isn't going to happen. And as you said before, simply being alive and needing things to survive and basic requirements is going to lead to exploitation in some form or another. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and reduce the exploitation where we can. We should reduce the amount of palm oil that's being produced. I think that's a no-brainer. But at the same time, we shouldn't then use the fact that that is a system of exploitation to justify the exploitation that occurs in other systems of agriculture, animal agriculture. That's still something we should address, because we could do both. They're not mutually exclusive. We could do both simultaneously, and that would be the preferable option.
Yeah, you just have to consider the opportunity cost, because really with a growing population every single day we need to fulfill the needs of the people, and there's people starving around the world. So in these developing countries, they make those decisions that they value the palm industry more than their biodiversity because they can feed their population.
But we're kind of off on a tangent here, because we're discussing palm oil and we're discussing the situations of people who economically may be depending on that industry, rather than our actions as individuals in the society where we live. And I think we've kind of almost interchanged the word moral with sustainable, and we should probably separate those two words a little bit. And kind of like maybe go back to that moral bit for a moment. We can go back to sustainability in a second perhaps, but go back to that moral thing in terms of like what we do to animals. Is there a moral justification, or is there a morally, I don't want to use the word righteous, it sounds like not the best word, but let's go for it anyway. Is there a morally righteous way to exploit and take the life of an animal in a situation where we don't have to?
Okay, so you're saying, is there a morally just way?
Morally just is the right phrasing.
Well, I think that based on my morality is just because I need to eat, and that's my own morality. As like, just from my own personal philosophy, I believe that morality is relative to the individual, but obviously as a culture and as a species, we have a collective kind of morality that we've adopted with each other. But then you have, different societies having different versions of that morality. But from my perspective, like, I've killed animals before. Like in the Middle East, we sacrifice lamb, you eat the whole lamb, and because I don't believe in a soul, so I don't actually feel any...
You have no empathy for an animal because you don't have a religious belief?
Yeah.
So you have empathy for humans in the absence of a religious belief, in the absence of a soul?
Well, it's not a moral belief. It's that because as a society we have built it's like biologically you are less inclined to kill another human because your goal as a species is to increase this longevity, is to improve. It's like any...
You're saying we're driven by some sort of biological primitive determinism, but we have moral agency, do we not?
The moral agency is all relative to the person, and it's defined by our needs, by our society as a collective.
But if we say that morality is subjective, and you kind of alluded to the fact that obviously different cultures have different versions of morality, does that mean that each culture's version of morality is justified simply because it is a cultural version of morality?
Well, when you say justified, that's referring to your own morality. So you're saying justified based on your own morality. But since I believe that everyone's morality is relative, I can't justify it. I can't justify it. If they want to kill someone, I can't justify it because I don't justify it based on my own morality that I think, okay, it's not really great to kill a person.
Yeah.
But if, people in China want to eat dogs, like that's, their source of consumption. So
what about people that want to kill humans? Obviously we're saying morality is subjective. That's my version of morality. Does that mean that we shouldn't have a judicial system? We shouldn't have prisons because, the people that commit those crimes maybe don't think that they've done something that they feel is morally wrong? Yeah,
so as a collective society, we have all come to the consensus that, hey, most of us, probably everyone pretty much, except for those few outliers, agree that murder is wrong.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, those people that kill don't believe that, and so they go out and do that. But see, that's how we operate as a society. Since we have this collective, we can implement these laws based on our collective morality.
Okay, but at the same time, there's a difference there. So you're saying that the morality is defined by the individual, but when enough people believe in a certain thing, then it becomes something that should have a punishment and a crime, when people whose own subjective version of morals contradicts the bandwagon effect.
Well, you're using the word should. Should is based on what those people believe. It's that if we have that same collective idea that, hey, murder is wrong, we will employ that. We will employ that, but it's
But why, if morality is subjective?
Because those people together collectively believe the same thing. Therefore, they will use their power to oppose that idea.
Yeah.
So it's like, if I'm living somewhere far alone, I have my own power to employ my own morality, my own decisions. But as a collective, if you do not comply with the moral agreements that society has dictated, you are now considered an outsider. You are now going to be basically struck by your people.
Yeah. So morality is
ostracized.
Yeah, ostracized.
Exactly.
So morality is subjective until enough people believe in it. What about in a situation where something that we think to be immoral, such as homophobia or the persecution of people based on their sexuality, in a culture where that is the bandwagon effect, is the majority of people think that homosexuality is wrong, should we then say, well, actually, because the majority of people in that culture believe it, therefore that's right, and because the outlier is that being gay is okay, gay people should be allowed to be persecuted because the bandwagon effect dictates that that's okay?
Okay, so that's a really good point, and it kind of goes back to what I said. So I grew up in a country where homosexuals are outlawed.
Yeah.
And the thing is that they have that collective power as a group to employ that decision. In your collective society, you believe that is something wrong, but they believe that is something right. And at the end of the day, it's survival of the fittest. So if you want to put your power over them and get them to stop doing that, like, I'm not going to say it's wrong or right, because I believe that
homophobia
morality
is not wrong if the majority of people believe in the homophobia in that culture.
But see, you're saying what I think is wrong and right, because you're asking me what I think is wrong. Yeah,
What
I
do
think
you think?
so. I think homosexuality is completely fine.
Yeah.
I have gay relatives. It's completely fine. Like, I have no problems against it. But that is what the society has dictated is wrong.
You would be fine with them being put in prison or being persecuted because they've gone into that culture.
See, but I wouldn't, because that's based on my morality. But their morality determines them that it's okay to do that. So that's my
that
own
should
bias.
be challenged. Surely it's not a bias, because I think that when we talk about issues of morals, of course, when we think about it from a philosophical perspective, we can say morality is subjective, but we don't live by that principle. In actuality, because we do have a judicial system, and we do believe in things being right and wrong.
Based on our collective morality.
Sure, but collective morality changes. Now, this culture has a turbulent history with things that we now consider to be immoral, and that's because we challenge those cultural norms. We didn't just abide by them because of the bandwagon effect, because a consensus at that time was this thing. Individuals said, and became collective, said, well, actually, this is wrong regardless of the group mindset and the group think. And I think even the morality, yes, when we take it down to this kind of deep philosophical tangent, is subjective. That's not the principle we live by. The principle we live by is a reduction of unnecessary harm and suffering. We don't stab people because hopefully we recognize that the stabbing of the person causes them to suffer, causes harm, is a non-consensual act that comes, that creates a negative experience for the individual who's been stabbed. And so for me, when it comes to animals, when I recognize that they too, these individuals having these experiences, in the absence of the necessity, causing them harm when I don't need to, must therefore be an immoral act by my moral code of reducing suffering in situations where I have the option to be able to.
Mm-hmm. But see, in the terms of my moral code, I don't think it's wrong, and I think that because we exploit so many different things in our world, that meat for me is something that I don't think is of the greatest importance to give up. Okay. In terms of other things, I think there are so many other things that, and that's based on my decision in life, because at the end of the day, everyone can exploit what they want, because everyone is exploiting every single second. But in my own decision, I think that, because I don't believe this is my own morality, that I think it is justified to,
If you were being exploited, if you ended up in a situation where you were being enslaved and exploited, would you accept that because people have the right to exploit who they want and how they want, because of the subjective kind of personal morality that we're talking about?
Well, I think it's a bit different, because if you're looking at, like, I'm going to give you a philosophical idea. It's the allegory of the cave, where these animals are born into this lifestyle, that they are born into this captivity, so they do not understand something that is greater. from my perspective, from my idea that I have lived this life and then I get put into maybe shackles or whatever, I would obviously oppose that because I've experienced something else.
Okay, but suffering is suffering, and I don't think. Let's think. Have you heard of the Fritzl family?
No.
Okay, a guy in Germany. He had children. He kept them locked in the basement. They never knew that there was an outside world. He would systematically rape them and do terrible things to them. They never knew anything else. This is the only existence they knew. But the suffering caused to them by the sexual exploitation, the rape, and the violence wasn't diminished because they didn't know that they could come to LA and enjoy sunshine all year round. Just because they didn't have the aspiration of something different didn't diminish the experience of suffering they were enduring.
Were they released?
They were eventually, but only because he was found out, and he went to prison, thankfully.
Yeah, and then you see the other side of things. Once you release these animals, they realize that they have been, imprisoned their entire life.
But their suffering, the girls who were suffering at the hands of Joseph Fritzl, their suffering wasn't diminished because they didn't have an experience of freedom. Hey, it's Ed. Sorry to interject, but I just wanted to briefly clarify a couple of details about the Fritzl case. Firstly, it happened in Austria and not Germany. And secondly, he kidnapped his daughter when she was 18. So, whilst she had experienced freedom outside of the basement, 3 of her children that were born out of the abuse inflicted by her father were born in the basement and had never experienced freedom themselves. So the point still remains. The experience of suffering isn't diminished simply because suffering is all someone has ever known.
Well, yeah, that is also human life as well. You have to keep that in mind, that we value human life because we are a collective species and we want to increase the longevity of our people.
Well, no, I'm talking about the individual. Their experience of suffering. The rape wasn't less of a rape to them because they didn't know that they could exist in a world where someone didn't rape them. That rape was still horrifying and still caused them suffering. An animal, a pig in a farm, may not know that there are pigs in the world who enjoy a life where they're not being exploited. But that doesn't make the exploitation and suffering that they endure, the mutilation, the slaughter, that doesn't make it less severe for them just because they don't have an awareness of a life without that suffering.
But see, they are being fed, they are on a farm. Like, that's because you're defining it as exploitation, but these animals are growing. They are mating with each other in these environments. Like, you're defining it as exploitation, but in my mind,
I've been artificially bred. But just because we feed an animal, just because we provide an animal with the requirements that they need to survive, water and food, doesn't mean it's not exploitation. Joseph Fritzl gave his the daughters that he had, who he exploited, he gave them water and food because he wanted to exploit them for the purposes he did. It's not a benevolent or a non-exploitative thing just because we give animals what they require to grow.
Yeah, but see, you're looking at exploitation from a moral sense. I'm looking at more from an economic sense, that there is a net loss, because that's how I see it. I don't see it from a moral sense. I really don't care for the life of these animals.
So if animals don't deserve morality or don't deserve moral consideration, then does that mean that we can do anything we want to animals, to any species?
You can apply morality to anything. You can apply it to trees. You can apply it to your love for maybe a building. You can apply it to anything. If you love something so much, you can have that moral affection for it. So I don't have that particular moral affection for those animals.
So we can do anything we want to an animal. If a dog walks past now and I decide to stomp that dog to death, you would not stop me.
It's not my dog, to be honest. Like, that's just how it, like, that's like, obviously, like, if it was like, because like that's also a different thing. I grew up in a country where stray dogs are everywhere, so people hunt those dogs like it's nothing. It's like they're like rats on the streets. Like, would you stomp a rat? I would stomp a rat. Yeah,
I would stomp a rat. Why would I?
Because they are pests and they actually exploit things that I'm taking advantage of. So it's like they make our streets dirtier, they spread diseases, so that is exploiting us in a sense.
Of course we can get around that in different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean stomping them to death, but the point I was making is, in the absence of any moral consideration for animals, if an animal was to walk past a dog, a cat, any animal, I would be entitled to stomp and kill them in any manner that I wish, cause them any amount of suffering that I so desired, because they don't deserve moral consideration, and you wouldn't stop me from doing so.
Well, if you're not doing it for the reason of consumption, then I just see it as not being, productive at all. But if you're going to consume that animal, I completely understand.
So unnecessarily harming them, or harming them for a reason outside of consumption. So as long as I consume them, that's fine. But if I do anything to an animal without consumption at the end, then it's wrong.
Well, yeah, just from my own morality, if you're not consuming it, then you're just, making it go to waste.
So animals do deserve moral consideration.
That's not just what I said. I said that the moral consideration is that you would use it.
Okay, but even if I don't want to use it, why is it therefore wrong for me to do those things to an animal, even if I don't consume them at the end of it? Why does that become wrong. When we talk about morality, there is nothing wrong to an animal because animals don't deserve moral consideration.
Yeah, so if that is your own morality and you choose to kill that animal, that's your decision. But if I disagree with you, I can either choose to, turn a blind eye, or I can choose to rebel against that and maybe stop that. It depends how much I care.
And so why does the consumption then change the morality of what's happened to the individual animal? Because to them, again, the experience that they've endured is no different if I consume them at the end. So why does me eating their flesh after they have died and gone through that experience make it moral what happens before?
Because from my own moral belief, by consuming them, you are being more sustainable in terms of the actual consumption.
But sustainability, when it comes, and morality are two different things. From a morality perspective, we're viewing that from the action of the victim. And so from the victim's perspective, what I do to them is not changed because it's more sustainable for me to eat their flesh at the end of it.
But why are you looking at it from their experience?
Because they're the victim in that experience.
But it's your world you're living in. You are the one with the consciousness.
Well, they have consciousness. It's their world as well.
Yeah, but this is your morality. This is your decision. You should not consider, you don't need to consider how they are feeling about this particular action. If your morality determines that it's okay to kill them, that's okay.
So, and this is the problem we have now, is we're justifying anything that we could possibly want to, as long as the individual inflicting the suffering and harm believes themselves that it's fine. Ted Bundy killed all those women, did all those things, but as long as Ted Bundy doesn't think that it's morally wrong, then therefore it's fine.
Well, it's morally wrong to the society because as a collective, our moral compass has been aligned so that we think murder is wrong. But in his own mind, he thinks murder is okay.
But the problem is, but then we don't allow that to be the case, because we don't allow individual beliefs around, specific instances of morality to change the fact that there should be some things that are objectively wrong within society.
But see, as a society, not everyone agrees that the lives of these animals are of importance, and they think that morally it is okay to consume these animals and kill them.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that it is okay. There's a difference, because some people used to think that it was acceptable to own slaves, but that doesn't mean that owning slaves is acceptable. So some people might say, well, I don't think it's morally wrong, but that doesn't mean that it isn't morally wrong, because it's because of the morals that we do live by in society. We've already decided that not inflicting harm is a morally preferable choice.
It's morally wrong from our perspective and our point in time, but if you were in that time period and you were raised in those standards, if you were raised in a situation where there's slaves, in your mind you would probably think it's okay to have slaves.
But that doesn't mean that
it's wrong from our particular point in time.
No, okay.
Because you're thinking there's a morality, like a moral code in the universe, that there are wrongs and rights, but I'm telling you that it is relative. So in that point in time, when you were raised, you probably think that it's okay, but I'm saying it's not okay from my particular point in time, because I think it is morally wrong, because that is what society as a collective has decided is wrong.
But you don't, even in the absence of a universal moral code, we can still understand something was wrong, even if in that time we didn't believe it to be. Okay, like for example, you may get into an argument with someone, and at that time you may feel that the position you're arguing is completely justified, but then realize afterwards, actually, that wasn't a justified position. Now, just because at the time when you argue and you felt that it was, doesn't negate the fact that actually, with a bit of objectivity, it wasn't. So with animals, we may subjectively in this time decide, well, this is fine, but that doesn't mean that it is, because especially if in the future we reflect and go, actually that was wrong, that's because in the time it is wrong regardless of our personal perception of that action.
Well, just from my understanding about nature of beings and animals, we can you see animals all the time in nature consuming other animals, and you even see chimpanzees now, like in the last 10 years, chimpanzees, which are close relatives to us, have been starting to consume meat.
Yeah.
So I think that historically it has been very normal to consume meat, and I think that is...
But just the longevity of an action determine whether or not it should still be considered moral now and into the future? Does the fact that we've done it for a long time mean that it's automatically acceptable? Okay, great, no. And
based on my own morality.
That's good. Okay, good. Well, all right, something we both agree on there. Our moral codes align at this point. Okay, and the second thing is to do with wild animals. Should we base our morality on the actions of wild animals who also do things like infanticide, rape, and other actions that we would conventionally think not to be justified?
Well, we are animals at the end of the day, and a lot of our decisions and a lot of things that happen in society can be mirrored to what happens in the animal kingdom. Absolutely. Every single day. So
should we base our morality on the actions of wild animals?
Well, we're basing it around our own values. We're not basing it around the animals. It's just our biological nature to do so. Right. I'm not basing anything like looking at an animal, say, oh, that's an animal, I should mimic what they are doing. It is that I am an animal, so these are tendencies of an animal. It is my tendency to consume food. It is my tendency to eat. It is my tendency to, to reproduce.
Sure.
These are all things that are just innately human.
Okay, yeah, well, those are necessities for human survival. But the thing is, you'd say, well, chimpanzees have done this. And so you're kind of like justifying your action by going, well, other animals do this. So whilst we might not go, right, what do animals do? Okay, that's what's moral and immoral. When we say, well, other animals do this, we're saying, well, we're justified because these other animals are doing it. And yes, we are animals, but at the same time, we have significant differences, such as the ability to have alternative choices, such as the ability to rationalize the morality of those actions, to understand if there is an alternative that reduces the harm that we cause. Other animals don't have the privilege or necessarily the cognitive ability to be able to do those things in the same way that we can.
But see, I think the harm done to animals is not that big of a problem. You just look at it because you see that it's an animal and you think that it has a soul, and you feel this kind of it's about sense of compassion for them. But I feel the same thing for trees. I feel the same thing for plants. It's like
you feel nothing for them as you feel nothing for animals.
Yeah.
But you do recognize, or maybe you don't, but do you think that there is a moral distinction between a plant and a conscious being, a sentient being who feels and suffers in a much similar way that we do?
It's based on my own morality. I have to keep coming back to that because that is my philosophical belief that morality is relative to the beholder.
So if someone was to harm you, that would be acceptable because and I'm not talking about in our culture. Let's get a little bit hypothetical. We go to another culture where something isn't legally wrong, okay, where something isn't there isn't a bandwagon effect. We're just in a situation where it's you and someone else. Would it be morally wrong for someone to harm you simply because of the harm that it causes you outside of the context of a cultural norm?
Well, see, because I have experienced something outside of that cultural norm, therefore my morality has dictated that is wrong. But if you were maybe in Viking times and it was normal to go to someone and take their belongings, and that's a different story because they have been in that environment, so their morality has been facilitated to believe that is a normal thing.
Yeah, we've gone around in a big circle, so my apologies. That was because of the question I just asked you. But there again, we're talking about this idea that if someone is bred into that situation and they don't know any different, that makes it moral to do what we do to them. Is that it? Because they're bred for that reason?
Okay, so let's go back. So I think from my perspective that it is immoral on my own beliefs to do something like that.
Yeah.
But in their environment, if they think that is normal,
then it is.
It is.
And it's fine for them to do it.
In their own, because that is their world.
But you would object to that happening. You wouldn't allow it to happen simply because in their version of reality, they think it's okay.
I would object to it based on my own version of morality. But if they think that is okay, they can partake in that. It's like how a lot of people oppose, people in China and Cambodia consuming dogs because people have a compassion towards dogs. But that in their mind, that is just another good to consume, and they don't have that compassion for it. So I don't see any problem with it because personally, I also don't see that compassion for dogs because I grew up in a culture where dogs are, not really, they're like outside and they're on the streets.
But again, right, because we went to the culture at the beginning, that point aside, yes, you were raised in a culture where maybe you weren't culturally taught to empathize with these animals. That doesn't make them suffering inflicted upon them less or more moral than in another country. Let's take a border. If in one country this is fine and culturally accepted, but just over this border it's not. If we pick the dog up and move them over the borders, right, left, the morality of the action of harming the dog doesn't change based on whether we go right, left.
It's based on the person who is inflicting the harm on the animal.
But we've already established that culture itself shouldn't determine morality, right? So the cultures that we are raised in, which determine our individual morality as well.
So the culture does determine a collective morality in which that society has power and they can impose their morality on other people. So as a collective, if they believe something, they can impose that law on other people. But at the end of the day, everyone has their own morality. So if that society determines that is okay, that is their world. That is how they want to behave, and that's just how it goes.
But I think, okay, we'll wrap it up in a second. I think that leads to a scary situation in the world where we'd ever strive to do anything that's that's substantially better. That's the sort of society that allows slavery to continue. It's the sort of society that allows homophobia and sexism and all these other issues that I would like to think most of us would rather not have in the world. It's a mindset and a belief system that allows all these things to continue without accountability and without the the desire or the demand for change. How do we ever dismantle systems of injustice and exploitation if we allow those systems of injustice and exploitation to continue because of individual morality and collective morality in those countries where injustice is allowed?
So those societies have determined what is right and what is wrong. Their experience that if something has a negative effect, they will make those adjustments to that, and that will therefore change their morality.
But will they? Will a society that stones people for being homosexual change that? Why would they without the accountability to acknowledge that it's wrong?
Okay, so that, I think we'll go back to that example in a sec, but I just wanted to bring up the example like of the dog thing. If they want to start farming dogs, and they think that is okay, but in the United States, that our morality is determined that it is not okay to consume dogs because we have this compassion for them. But in China, they start farming dogs. I don't see a problem with that based on my own morality because that is how they want to handle it. We want to farm cattle. That's completely understandable. And the same thing is with so my belief is that homosexuality is completely fine. But in these Arab countries, they believe in God. So in their mind, they think that God has told them that homosexuality is not okay. I can believe as much as I want that it is completely okay to be homosexual, but in their culture, in their minds, it is not okay to be homosexual.
And would you tell them that that is wrong? Or would you say, or would you not? Would you say that is something you should stop?
I will tell them.
Yeah.
I would be worried to tell them because you can get prosecuted for that if you tell them something. But so then it comes back to the subject of, let's go back to like consumption of animals. In my own morality, I don't believe that it is wrong to consume these animals, whereas other things I believe are wrong. And
okay, so just to touch, I want to just try and finish by trying to understand your morality. Trying to understand where you create a notion of right and wrong. So why in your mind is stoning someone for being gay morally wrong? What is it about the action that's morally wrong?
That they are humans and that this action inflicted on them is done for something clearly just religious based, and there isn't really anything wrong with it.
What is it about being human that therefore makes it something that's morally wrong?
That biologically we have empathy towards humans because that is how we operate as a species, and we want the longevity of our peoples, therefore we have a compassion for other humans.
Okay, but obviously I don't think that's necessarily true, because if someone is killed, that doesn't impact the longevity of the species if one person is killed prematurely for these actions. Okay, but we say about empathy. Okay, so we have the ability to empathize with a human when a human is going through that ordeal. What aspect of what they're enduring are we empathizing with?
Well, it is an innate nature in us to empathize with them because we are one biological species. Therefore, they're related to us. We have the empathy towards them.
Okay. So when you see a human having that,
it is like when you have a troop of animals. They have the empathy towards their own species, but outsiders are rejected. It's the same thing.
Well, I mean, a lot of animals can show empathy for other animals, and so can we. We know that's the
that's
thing.
If they're codependent, or if there's a benefit to gain from.
Not necessarily. And we can empathize with other animals. Okay, so maybe this isn't what you've said, but with empathy, we say that we're empathizing with them because they're human and we recognize that they're human. But when we see something bad happening to someone else, our first thought isn't, oh, they're human. Surely the first thought is, oh, they're suffering. The reason that stoning a gay person is because
for them because they are human.
No, because we have the intellect to be able to empathize and understand that they're suffering. We can understand that they're suffering.
It's an innate biological nature that we feel that empathy for them.
So we have so because of our innate biological nature, we have no ability to empathize with animals. There's nothing about animals that we can empathize with, and the only reason we can empathize with humans is because of an innate biological understanding that they are the same species as us.
So that empathy that has been adapted for animals is based on the utility that we've gained from them. So like when you have a dog, it brings you satisfaction. Therefore, we have created that sympathy for them, or that empathy for them. And that is how that empathy is gained for other animals. But when you're in the animal kingdom and you see like a lion, it doesn't feel any sympathy or empathy for you, and it will.
But they don't necessarily have the ability to. I think it's not because of a utility.
They do because if you spend time with that animal and you give it food, you've seen people who tame lions and they create a relationship with that lion. Therefore, that empathy is built with the lion, and it feels empathy for you.
But that doesn't mean that they held to the same moral standard when they kill a gazelle out of necessity for survival. Right, okay. So we said about, it was humans and animals. And I think that when we talk about this kind of situation of empathizing, it's not about utility. It's about a recognition of what animals are capable of achieving. So back, obviously not that long ago, we often thought of animals as being these kind of like insentient automatons, like, kind of like they didn't have any consciousness, they didn't experience, they were separate to us. And so we justified exploiting them because we didn't see that they had some of these capacities to experience. So I think that it's not the utility of animals that has allowed us to empathize with them, because the utility of them, the fact that we are able to take things from them, such as flesh and secretions and such, has actually made us exploit them more than we ever have. So the utility they can provide for us has led to the mass exploitation that now occurs. But I think that what we've learned about animals is what is now creating our ability to empathize with them. The fact that the things that are in humans that we empathize with, the suffering, the pain, the desire for pleasure, the things that we can empathize when a human is suffering, we've learned that the animals who we exploit also possess the same traits. The sentience, the capacity to suffer, the capacity to experience pleasure as well as pain. And now we can empathize with them in the same way that we do with other humans.
See, that's all living beings at the end of the day. And that's we've understood this for a while, that these animals feel pain. And I think that even though killing them for our own consumption is fine, because we don't feel that same empathy for them, I still feel that we don't feel that empathy for them.
We must. I don't believe for a second that if you saw a gratuitous thing happening to an animal in front of you that you could stop and was needless, that you wouldn't feel empathy for the animal.
So when I was in Africa,
Sure.
I don't know, 2017 or something like that, we had this goat, and I lived with a Maasai for 2 weeks, and in that culture, how they kill an animal, how they kill a goat, is they don't cut it with a knife. They cover its mouth and nose so that it can't breathe until it dies, and they believe that's the way to dispose of the animal. And then they cut the neck and they drink it. And I had to do that process myself. I had to strangle this animal, and personally I didn't feel that sense of that empathy for the animal. Like, I could see that it was scared, I could see that it was knowing it was about to die, and it was kicking and flailing, but I understood that this is what must be done so that we can consume.
Well, maybe for the tribe.
For the tribe, and the same.
But not for you in the society where you are now. And we can debate the morality of what the tribe does in the culture where they are, but I'm more interested in what we have to do here and now. And look, your inability to empathize with the goat, it doesn't change the moral consideration an animal deserves, because as an individual, you lack the capacity to empathize with what they're enduring.
Yeah, I do like the empathy for them.
Yeah.
And that's based on my own morality, that I don't feel that empathy for them, therefore I think it's okay to consume them.
Okay. Well, I feel like we're touching on a circle again.
Yeah, it's just like, because that is kind of my own philosophical belief about it, like just the whole kind of, the virtuous thing of feeling this empathy for the animals. People play that card a lot, but like at the end of the day, we are all exploiting in so many different ways. And you probably in your day-to-day life, you have partaken or you have contributed to something that has exploited many people, probably even killed people. Like, if you go into these like crystal shops, or if you buy anything that's mineral related.
I don't buy crystals.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying anything like mineral related, that exploits so many people. Like, if you've been to a mine before and see how these people are exploited, and they don't even get paid.
But it's an appeal to futility again. Exploitation here does not justify exploitation here, when both exploitations should be addressed. And I think that brings us to a nice ending. And I obviously sincerely hope that you never come across someone who lacks empathy for you. Because obviously at the end of the day, when we're talking about what happens to animals, our lack of empathy towards them doesn't negate the suffering that they're forced to endure, as it wouldn't for you if you came across someone who lacked empathy for you.
Happens every single day.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Every single day in society.
It was great to speak to you. It was a really great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.